Hello, middle schoolers, and welcome to week 2 on your unit on positive and negative space. My name is Miss Smullen, and I'll be guiding you through this visual arts lesson. Today, your required materials will be 3 sheets of paper, 1 to write down your answers, and 2 to complete your artwork. You'll also need a pair of scissors, glue or tape, and then you'll also need some art materials to complete your background. In the example I show you today, I'll be using a magazine for my background, but you can use markers or crayons, or even something as simple as a pencil or pen. All right, let's get started. Today's objective is students will be able to explore how artists manipulate positive and negative space in their artwork. And students should be able to create their own artwork that demonstrates their understanding of positive and negative space. Now, before we can master our objective, we need to review exactly what positive and negative space is. Positive space is defined as the main object in an work of art. I call this the stuff. Opposite of positive space is negative space. Negative space is the space and things that surround the positive space. I call this everything else. Let's take a look at a few works of art and see if you can pick out the positive and negative space contained in each artwork. The first work of art we're going to look at today may look familiar to you. Many of you may have studied this artwork in your art classes, or perhaps have even seen it on display at the National Portrait Gallery. I'd like you to grab your piece of paper and answer the following questions. First, what is the positive space in this image? As you look at this image, try to identify what the main subject of the painting is. The main object in a painting or work of art is the positive space. So what is the positive space in this image? The next question I'd like you to answer is, what is the negative space in this image? Remember, the negative space is the things that surround the positive space. How would you identify the negative space in this image? The last thing I want you to consider is, what do you notice about the negative space in this image? You might have to look a little bit closer, but there's something very interesting going on with the negative space. As you look at this image, notice that the negative space, which you may have identified as the floral and leaf pattern in the background, overlaps some of the positive space being Obama sitting in the chair in the center of the image. The negative space overlaps the positive space. That's quite interesting. Let's look at another example. The next work of art we're going to be looking at is a drawing. I'd like us to answer similar questions to what we did in painting number 1. So, first, I would like you to write down, what is the positive space in this image? Please identify the main object in this drawing and write down your answer now. The next question is, what is the negative space in this image? Please identify the space that surrounds the main object in this drawing and write that down as negative space. The last question I'd like you to consider is, how does the artist manipulate the space in this work to create emphasis? Remember that in art, emphasis is defined as an area or object within the artwork that draws attention and becomes the focal point. In this example that we've been looking at, the positive space in the image is the woman. The negative space would be the space around the woman. However, the artist manipulates the space in the artwork to create emphasis on the woman's face. You could argue that the woman's hands are part of the positive space. However, her hands have no detail, and the shapes of her hands blur into the negative space. This is a great example of how an artist can manipulate the space in their artwork. I'd like to share with you 2 more examples of how artists can manipulate positive and negative space. Consider this work. What do you believe the positive space is in this image? Please write down your answer. Now that you've identified the positive space, please identify the negative space in this image. As you look at this image, I'm sure you determined that part of the positive space is the trees in this image, the black silhouette of the trees against the sun. However, what happens when we change the orientation of this artwork? Does the orientation of this work change your opinion of how to interpret the space in the work of art? When we flip this image upside down, look again for the positive space in the trees. When the image is flipped, the trees are suddenly positive space, but now they're yellow. This artist does a great job of manipulating positive and negative space to make her artwork more interesting. Let's look at one final image by the same artist. In this artwork, what is the positive space in this image? Please write down your answer now. After you've determined the positive space in this image, please identify what is the negative space in this image. Once you have those two answers completed, consider how does the artist blur the lines between positive and negative space in this artwork. You may have identified the city's buildings in black as part of the positive space. That would mean that the space in between the buildings, the white areas, would be the negative space. However, this artist blurs the lines between positive and negative space by using that white space between the buildings to create arms of hands that are reaching into the rest of the artwork. This artist does an exceptional job of manipulating this space to create interesting things for the viewer to observe. Great job practicing identifying positive and negative space. I hope you paid particular attention to how artists can manipulate the positive and negative space to make the artwork more enjoyable for the viewer to observe. As we transition into our assignment this week, I want you to think how the positive and the negative space work together to make an interesting work of art. Let's sit down and I'll show you what our assignment is this week. In this week's assignment, you're going to focus on putting the emphasis in your artwork on the negative space. So the first thing we're going to have to do is create an interesting background that will help showcase the negative space in your artwork. In the example I'm about to show you, I've just gone through a magazine and picked out a few interesting pictures that were fairly dark. So you want something that will really stand out in your background. When you've chosen what you'd like to include in your background, you can cover your entire white page with the clippings from your magazine. So I've just cut them into little strips, and I will just use my glue and fill my page with color. As you continue to do this, you want to make sure that you're not leaving any white spaces, because we are going to need to use the white paper to accentuate a different part of your artwork. So as I continue to line these up, I'm going to think about making it an interesting pattern as I go across. Now for this example, I've done this in advance so that you don't have to sit here and watch me glue strips of paper down. So this is an example of a background that you could use for your project that's made out of magazine clippings. If magazines and glue is not something you have at home, there's definitely other ways you can complete this background. I've done two more examples just to kind of show you the different types of things you can use. This one is just created with crayons, just in little zigzag lines, filling up the whole page. I did it in a starburst pattern, but you could do any sort of background as long as you're covering up most of the white. The last example I just did with a pen. You could also do this with a pencil. I only chose pen because I wanted you to be able to see it on the screen. And this was a very simple background I just created by making small and medium-sized circles and just filling the entire page. So after you've completed your background, however you want to do it, you're going to set that to the side and you're going to get your other piece of paper that was in your required materials list, and you're going to start to think about what you would like your positive space to look like. So in this example, I think I'm going to make something like maybe a feather. So I'm just going to very carefully draw a feather. I'm not sure you can see that. Let's try it in Sharpie. Hopefully I don't make a mistake. I'm just going to draw a simple feather that fills up most of the space of my paper. So this feather I'm going to show as my positive space. After you draw your object that's going to serve as your positive space, I want you to finish this part by making a frame around your paper. I'm simply making this frame by making kind of a squiggly line that goes around the outside, and you want it to touch your positive space in at least 2 locations. So as you can see, I have it touching here at the bottom, and I have it touching here a little bit at the side, but I'm also going to extend my feather so that it touches here at the top as well, okay? So now the next step in this project is to remove the negative space. So in order to do that, I want to identify what the negative space is, and I'm going to identify it by putting an X where the negative space is located. So I know that the negative space is the space that surrounds the positive space, and I know that the positive space in this drawing is my feather and my frame. That's the stuff I've drawn. So that means this space that is around my feather is negative. So again, I'm just labeling my negative space with an X to keep me organized. After I've identified the negative space, I'm going to remove it from my artwork. So to do this, I like to use a pencil and a pair of scissors. If you are very skilled, you might be able to just cut this out by only cutting the negative space out, but I like to use this trick. I take my pencil and I'm just gonna kind of push a hole in the paper on each side where I need to cut something out. And then that's gonna allow me to stick my scissors in and cut out this negative space. So I'm just gonna follow the line, the edge of my positive space, and I'm gonna cut out everything that I've identified as my negative space. So as I do that, you should start to see that your positive space is left behind, and it is the white paper that's left behind. Now I've gone ahead and done this in another example, so I'm gonna pull that out right now. As you finish cutting out your negative space, you should end up with something like this. And you can see in this example, you can still see some of my pencil marks around the outside where I drew my positive space. So you want to get rid of those pencil marks. So you can either go and erase it to make it look more professional, or what I like to do, here's a nice trick, is I just like to flip it over, and now all the pencil mark is on the back, and I have my nice, clean, professional looking cutout. And again, this cutout should show your positive space, and the negative space is left empty. Now the last step in this project is to get your background that you created. So remember, I created 3 different backgrounds to choose from. One from a magazine, one by using crayon, and I created the last one with a pen. I'm gonna choose my magazine, background, and you're gonna put it underneath your positive space. And now the last thing that you're gonna wanna do is take your glue, or if you have tape, that works too, and you're going to put glue underneath the white paper that shows your positive space, and you're gonna try to glue it down nice and even with your example, your background that shows the negative space. So as you do this, your artwork, when it's completed, it should show the negative space as the more complicated, interesting part of your artwork, and the positive space should be bright white so that it really stands out, because there's high contrast between this very interesting, colorful background and this very stark white positive space foreground. So if you've created an artwork something like this, you've succeeded in showing negative space and positive space. Now, an interesting thing, I'm always interested in challenging my students. So if you'd like to do the extension, you might want to think about how to manipulate the space in your positive space to make your negative space also show an object. So maybe you do that by changing these little points in the feather. Maybe those become hands, and now suddenly it's not just a picture of positive space feathers, it's also a picture of negative space hands. So that's just something to think about, and you would cut that out as well. But thank you for joining us. I hope you do a really nice job on your project, and I wish you luck. Great work. As a reminder, our objective today was to explore how artists manipulate positive and negative space in their artwork and create your own artwork that demonstrates your understanding of positive and negative space. The example we worked on together today was this one that showed a feather as the positive space and a colorful magazine collage background. But remember, please don't just copy what I've created. I want you to think about how you can use the materials that you have at home to creatively problem solve and create this assignment. Here's another example that uses the positive space as birds on a wire, and the background was created using pen instead of magazines. So if you don't have the proper materials at home, it'll be a challenge, but if you use your creative problem solving, I'm sure you can still reach our objective to demonstrate your understanding of positive and negative space. I've really enjoyed our time together. Please tag me on Twitter with whatever you create at Art with Smullen. I'd love to see how you're staying creative while you're at home, and we'll see you next week for your visual arts lesson. Have a great week. Bye.